Hello and welcome to the Briefing Room. I'm Bill Froehlich, your host from WTCM Radio News. It's our weekly roundtable discussion about some of the stories making headlines here across northern Michigan. And joining me this week, to my right, Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10. Welcome back, Sara.
Thanks, Bill.
And Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Peter, thanks again for coming in. Big story today, of course, seems to be the weather, as most schools across northern Michigan are closed. TCAPS just announced they're going to do a half day. And basically, it seems to me like one of those situations where the decision just they weren't able to make the decision quickly enough in the morning. Yeah. The buses were already out. Yeah. Sara, just kind of take me through your newsroom and experience with school closings, because those are, I think, a lot of viewers are curious about those, but there's a lot of chaos behind it too.
Well, in the morning show, we run something along the screen, always keep them updated, things like that. But as the day goes on, I mean, really just, we may end up doing, we could end up doing a story about that, with kids getting out of school early. What are they doing? Skiing, winter activity, you know what I mean? There's always ways to tie a story into that too. But obviously, snow is a big story in the newsroom, especially after last winter when we didn't have any. So anything to do with snow, whether it's our road commission's prepared, things like that. Tow trucks.
That's kind of what I was going to ask next, is we had this big March snowstorm, and now we're talking about, is this the next March, which seems so dramatic.
It looks like not, but we interviewed one of the meteorologists in Gaylord at the National Weather Service, and he said that. He said, this looks very much like what we saw in March. And I think when we spoke to him, though, and we said, well, might it miss us, because that happens up here. There's going to be a big storm, and then there's not. And he said, there's no way this is coming. But not long after that, the forecast dropped from their forecast, the National Weather Service. They were forecasting 8 inches of snow during the day today, Thursday. Yep. And then not long after that, it dropped to 4 inches. And he was saying it looked very similar, but one of the things you have to take into account is that a lot of that infrastructure that collapsed under the weight of the snow, those were the weaker poles and the weaker lines, weaker tree branches, all that came down. So now presumably the sturdier stuff is left. You kind of cleaned out some of the dead wood, so it won't. Even if you had a storm like that, it might not be as punishing as it was.
Yeah, and I noticed that too. Midday yesterday, it was all of a sudden the forecast was a lot different. So we're just kind of waiting to see, but I think we'll still get quite a bit of snowfall in the area. The other thing I noticed last night, and which you probably noticed on the roads this morning, was they were saying the temperatures aren't dropping as quickly as we expected. It's going to be more of a slushy start to the day, which it turned out to be, as opposed to this, inch of wet snow or heavy snow on the ground. It was slop. Yeah. So there's kind of a follow-up there. Sara, let me turn back to you too and just ask you, I know 9 and 10 did some stories yesterday. We did some stories on the radio yesterday, just in terms of preparing for a storm like this, because as you mentioned, you got the road commission. I know you guys were out at Cherry Capital Airport. Yeah. We talked to the Red Cross. We talked to TCAPS about what happens if you close school on Friday. We're just trying to get ahead of it. So kind of take me through that. I assume there's a lot of learning from March of what potentially we need to prepare for.
There is. One of our reporters was live at the airport last night, and they, always prepare for cancellations. We also talked to a travel agency. They said that they're swamped because it's holiday travel. Obviously, everyone is really trying to get ahead of it, and they said if we're not reaching out to travelers, they're calling us and saying, what can we do? But a lot of it, like Passageways Travel was saying, is that it's not, Cherry Capital. They have this great equipment to keep the runways clean, but it's the delays outside of Cherry Capital, whether you're flying through Detroit or Chicago, and it's all kind of a bottleneck, that kind of flows into Cherry Capital. So there were a couple cancellations this morning I saw, but they're prepared. That's all you can do. So,
do you have I don't know, either favorite or maybe least favorite type of story you like to do in the snow? I mean, as a TV person, sometimes you have this vision of the guy standing out in the corner or the lady standing out in the corner.
What kind of shot are you looking
for?
The
blizzard is right behind me. And,
a favorite, I think, is when we kind of just do like a man on the street and we go get a guy shoveling his driveway, or his snowblower won't start. And those are the great people, and that's what I love about my job. I love talking to officials. I love talking to state reps. I love talking to police, but I think the coolest part of our job is meeting some of those people where you knock on their door and they're just They're everyday people. And I think that that's the most fun because they give you the best interviews. It's the most emotional, either I love the snow, my kids are sledding today, or it's, I hate this, I was late for work because I had to shovel, so it just depends. But those are my favorite.
Well, I was late for this show, and I appreciate the two of you waiting for me. Peter, let me ask you too about school closings. How does your newsroom deal with those? I imagine, just like us, they're all calling in, but you guys, I don't know how big your staff is in terms of trying to get through all that information.
Well, there's two issues. One is collecting them, which we've given up on, and in fact, schools don't really call us anymore. And I think that's because the TV is the best way to get that information out because they can just run
scroll it
constantly.
So then now that we've expanded our signal to, we've put a transmitter in Manistee, and we put a transmitter up in Harbor Springs. We have this huge coverage area, and so if you start to read a list that you give the impression that the list is complete, and you forget, Pellston Community Schools or whatever, and someone was listening and they didn't hear Pellston, and you led them to believe you actually have the complete list. So frankly, what we do now is we give a more sort of general, we'll maybe mention Traverse City schools. Some of the schools will say, and a lot of schools are closed, and you should check. And because we've just given up on the pretension that we can keep track of all the districts across Northwest Lower Michigan, and on the radio.
It is tough.
Yeah,
it's easy to miss. It's easy to miss schools.
Yeah, and even when I was in television, we had that problem occasionally too. With if one school district closes, there's the assumption that that school district speaks for the neighboring ISD.
Right.
So, but yeah, that is a good good point, interesting challenge I think for all of us trying to keep on top of how often that changes. I think the other thing that seems to have changed over the last couple of years is this one call alert system where all the parents can now get the phone calls.
And the web. There's a million ways to get that information now, and so.
It is comforting, though, to know that people still kind of tune to radio and television
absolutely.
For some of that conversation. But there's so many different ways now that.
Well, what does Ron do in the morning? Does he read a long list?
They go through a long list.
Yeah. See, in our format, we're not. We just drop in news here and there, and so we would have to take a story, and cover, just drop the whole story, and that's a great news story that a reporter in Pakistan produced, and so just to read names for 4 minutes and you're not even sure you have them all, so it's
a challenge.
It's a challenge.
What do you think happens from here on out on this type of a story? And I can ask both of you. I mean, how much local angle do you take from this today? And as I said, we talked to TCAPS about the possibility of closing tomorrow. And actually, before I do that, I should tell you guys a story of. I talked to TCAPS yesterday, and I said, let's talk about Thursday, Friday with this storm. I said, what happens Friday? When can you make that call on whether or not there will be class on Friday? And then let's also talk about Thursday. Any chance you will do a delay or any chance you will leave early? And I was actually told, well, there's no chance we're going to do a delay because that's just, if we're going to call school, we're going to call school.
I've never understood delays. I guess it gives people time to clean the roads, but if it's still snowing,
Yeah, and TCAP said, there's just too much logistical issues with the bus drivers and parents, waiting around, and with a school district that size, they just don't want to mess with a delay. Then they also told me, we're not going to cancel school early either. We can't expect parents to drop what they're doing at a moment's notice and come be at school at noon to pick up their kids or meet their kids at home. We don't want to send the kids home to an empty house. So I was kind of told matter-of-factly those things aren't happening. And then we find out this morning, well, it's a half day. And one of the teachers at my kid's school told me, this is, I've been working here 7-8 years. This is the first time this has ever happened. So a pretty unusual situation. An example of a story that could be followed up on today. But Sarah, what do you envision potentially doing with the storm today?
Airport cancellations are always a big thing. They're always a big deal just because it's hectic, for big reason. And second of all, because people are trying to get somewhere for the holidays, you
Yeah.
know, and TVC doesn't have that many flights. So the ones they do have are precious. Those people, if they miss a flight this morning, they may not be able to get on one till later,
Yeah.
significantly later. So maybe something with the airport, or, it also depends on how much snow we get. If it kind of, tuckers out and we don't get too much more, then we don't know if it'll be a story at all. It's just kind of, depending on, but obviously ski hills are always a big thing. They depend on this, things like that, anything.
And we'll have to, wait and see if shelters, if it gets
Red
bad enough,
Cross
if
is
shelters
ready,
become
yep.
an issue. Peter, how do you do it in your newsroom, just in terms of waiting to see what happens throughout the course of the day?
Unless something significant happens, we wouldn't do much. Unless there's a lot of people losing power,
Right.
we wouldn't. It's a winter storm. We have them all the time. For the resources we have and the way
Sure.
we work, it just wouldn't. Unless it's something more like what we saw in
Substantial.
March. But
Yeah.
it didn't look to me this morning that it's going to be like that.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other interesting point about what happens with schools tomorrow. If it does turn out to be that 3 inches today and 3 inches tonight,
Yeah.
what's to say? Why couldn't we go back to school tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be one of those circumstances where all of a sudden we are back in school,
Right.
and we didn't expect to be tomorrow. Let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the big stories that Peter and Sara are working on this week. And Sara, I know you had kind of a heartbreaking story yesterday to deal with. Tell us about what happened there in Missaukee County.
We received a press release, I believe it was on, what is today? Tuesday evening, from the Missaukee County Sheriff's Office that there was an infant who was already deceased that was brought to Cadillac Mercy Hospital. And the hospital called the Sheriff's Department and said, this doesn't look right, it's suspicious. So they have been calling this death suspicious. I'm saying infant, that's what they're calling it, but it's a toddler. He was 14 months,
yep.
yeah. And they're calling it suspicious. And we did talk to the sheriff yesterday, but there wasn't much that he could offer us as of noon yesterday. We did get his name, Peyton Disbrow, as of 3 or 4. And all we really had for that story was just, for a marker, was just a road, And we tried to knock on some doors and maybe get some neighbors, but we really, it's a country road, so the houses are really far apart, so it was tough to get anybody that really knew the family. And the road runs for miles, so it could have been anywhere on that road.
Yeah.
But it's just a heartbreaking thing to see that. It's a hard story to cover. We don't like covering those things. It's just tough. And so, we're going to continue to follow it, I guess, as more details come in and see what happens. But I don't know where the investigation's at right now, just kind of continuing. But it's a sad story.
Yeah, and I remember seeing the state police are investigating the
Yep.
cause of, I think the press release said the crime lab is looking at the cause of injuries, which opens up a whole nother list of questions,
Yeah.
obviously. But I think one thing that kind of seemed unusual about that is that the toddler had already passed away by the time they got to the hospital.
Right.
So a bunch of circumstances, and some of them maybe a little more unusual than others.
Right. Yeah, it is. I guess the sheriff was telling us that family members had dropped the baby off or had taken the baby to the hospital, and when they called, they said that he was in distress, but by the time they got there, he was dead. And I would presume it's not an easy thing for people at the hospital to deal with that either. Even though they see that, it's not a good thing. And like I said, it's nothing I like to cover. It's horrible. I have nieces myself that are around that age, and I just think it's really, really unfortunate. So whatever happened, it's really too bad.
Peter, let me turn over to you, and we kind of take things up north here as we talk about one of your stories this week up on Mackinaw Island. There's quite a bit going on up there. It's been a while since I've been up there, but it seems like lots of things are changing.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So I'm not even quite sure where to start. But the basic issue that the island has is it's you might say being loved to death, or some people would say that. Obviously it's it's probably, I don't know that there would be a more significant visitor, a tourist destination in Michigan than Mackinac Island. About 1 million people go there every year, and So the property has become quite valuable, and for various reasons, there is a lot of development lately.
Which is, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty unusual, isn't it? I remember a couple years ago I was up there, and there was this house coming down and something else going up, and it was just all a buzz. Like everyone who
was that McNally Cottage?
I don't even know which one it was.
That was the real flashpoint in all this was 2 or 3 years ago, McNally Cottage, which I believe was a large bed and breakfast on Main Street that dated back to the late 1800s. There was a proposal to demolish it, and that really got everybody's attention, including Interlochen Public Radios, and brought to light the fact that there are no historic districts on Mackinaw Island, so there are no protections for old buildings like McNally Cottage.
Yeah, and it seemed like nothing had really, or not much, if anything, had happened kind of before then, and now you're saying there's all kinds of potential changes out there.
Well, I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I spoke with the historian who did the survey work in around 2000 when the national landmark status was renewed, and the whole island is a national landmark, not just some buildings. The whole thing is a national landmark, and it was one of the first, I believe, I read there were 90 when the program was started in 1960, and it was fairly competitive, and Mackinaw Island was selected among that first group for national landmark status. But the woman who did the survey in 2000 to renew that status, based on her work, she said between 1972 and 2000, about 140 buildings were lost on the island. And she couldn't say exactly, but she would assume the majority of those would be historic buildings, and they were probably torn down. Some may have burned. So this has been going on. So in 2002, the National Park Service put the landmark status on a watch list. And the main issue that the National Park Service has is that there are no protections for old buildings. Basically you have a 200-year-old city that has a number of very old buildings, and there's nothing in place to guard those. Anybody who buys one of those buildings can do whatever he or she likes with it.
Because that's part of the nostalgia.
Right,
of the island,
and that's the debate. What is the fabric of Mackinaw Island, and can you tear down old buildings and put up new ones that are very nice? But is that the same? And the way the islanders who are really upset about this, the way they will put it is they will say we can't become Disney World if we become, by which they might mean a fake city, something that's not real, something that is a facade intending to look some way but isn't actually the real thing, which is what Disneyland or Disney World is. And I spoke with a gentleman who his name's Frank Pompa, and he has a summer place on the island, and he's been on the board of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. And he told me that he was on the island one morning. He likes to go on the early ferry and have his breakfast in, I think he said Marquette Park, which I don't know which park that is. But, and he said he's sitting there and there's a son with his dad, and it's morning, and they're looking down Main Street, and he says, the son says to his dad, "Look, Dad, it's just like Disneyland." I almost had a hard time believing that this actually happened because so many islanders will say we can't become Disneyland. It needs to be authentic. From the developer's perspective, the property is very valuable, and so if you buy an old cottage, or there are buildings I'm told on cedar post foundations. That is not up to modern code, and if you spend $1 million on a piece of property with a little rickety old shack that used to be used, by a fishmonger, and your intention is to demolish that and put in a new building, and you paid them, say, $1 million, and all of a sudden historic districts are put in place, I think it is reasonable to say that a substantial amount of that value in that property is gone, because now you have to lift an old building, you have some major restraints that you have to work in. But the people, who are saying we have to do this, they're saying without these buildings, nobody is going to come back to Mackinac Island. They can go to Disneyland. They can go to any other place with a bunch of fancy new buildings and buy fudge. And because if we let all this go by the wayside, then we're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So that's the debate, and it's a fascinating debate because property is very expensive. I mean, a lot of money is at stake,
sure.
and you're talking about an island with 500 people that live there, and they have to manage this, and they have to be on these planning commissions, and they're the planning commissioners are not paid positions. These are volunteer positions trying to deal with the developers who can be pretty aggressive. When I was there, Ira Green, the developer who demolished McNally Cottage and put a new hotel, he had a court reporter at the planning commission meeting, somebody making a transcription like you do in court. And this was pointed, I saw this person when I was there, but I didn't quite understand what was going on, and I just let it slip from my mind, and I was on the ferry out and someone pointed this out to me. And so I did speak at length with Ira Green, but I didn't get to ask him about the court reporter. But what other reason is there to have a court reporter other than to keep the threat of litigation right in the face of public officials? Just a reminder, I'm creating a transcript, so when I sue you, there's a lot of hostility, and and then, I don't know how much.
Well, that's nothing at all like Disney World, because that's the happiest place on earth.
Right. But they all take off their costumes at the end of the day and they go home. Mackinaw Island is a real city. It's a.
What's interesting, I guess, to me about that is, I would think, and maybe I'm clueless on it, but I would think just by the nature of having this National Historic Landmark designation, that would kind of implicitly imply that things can't change. But you're saying those are two separate issues.
Yeah, the designation is based on what's there. The historic districts are the tool for a local government to actually have a say and require certain reasons to demolish an old building so they can get involved. And the other thing they could do, a lot of people will criticize Ira Green's new hotel and say it doesn't fit in. And I have to admit, when I showed up, I'd not been to Mackinac Island probably for 30 years. I was there when I was a little kid. I walked down Main Street, and I was sort of, where's the new hotel? Because I don't know. And I walked right by it, and I didn't notice it. So
see, I went there in the summer, August, September, and I didn't notice anything different. But I wasn't really looking for anything different either.
And that's the thing. And then
they have done a good job or a good enough job of making it look like it belongs.
I guess what I would say is it's a very attractive building. It's beautiful, but when it was later, when people were pointing out to me the differences in it compared to the rest of the streetscape, and a lot of people on Mackinac Island think it's an abomination. The other thing they could do with a historic district is require more architectural oversight. And I'm a little less clear, this is a little fuzzier than whether, demolishing a building or not. Right now, there is a city architect, and there is a process that developers have to go through with that architect, and there's some give and take, and well, what about this? But I get the sense it doesn't have a lot of teeth. If they created a historic district, I'm told, then they could really make some requirements. Say you have to do this, and then they could really bone that up, and that'll be a cost to developers. The developers will have to do all that extra architectural work. They'll have to be, they'll have to redraft. So there are some fundamental questions about what the community needs and who pays, and it's not a simple. It's not a cut and dry. Oh, we just have to protect these buildings. I mean, clearly they need to protect the island. But the question is, what are they protecting? And Ira Green, he'll use the word charm. He doesn't like the word historic. He doesn't use it. He'll talk about the charm of the island, and that's what people come for. The people who are worried about what's happening in all this development will talk about historic preservation and the historic look, and frankly, a little more. What would be the word? A little more hodgepodge of a look to the city, because it was developed over 200 years, and different cottages and different buildings were all put in, rather than now Main Street is starting to look fairly uniform because everything's being demolished and filled in. The old theater is going to be demolished on Main Street. That'll be filled in with more, I think, more hotel space. So it's starting to look more uniform as you look down Main Street.
They run into, I would think the danger there would be you take down the theater, you take down XYZ building and keep putting in hotels, so you'll have all this room for people, but then what will there be to see?
Right. Exactly.
Right. But now, and Ira Green's new place, the Bicycle Street Inn, it is called. that has actually a mall underneath. So you'll walk in to and there are a number of shops under it, and a restaurant with facing on Main Street. So they're thinking about that too. It's a debate about what is the character of Mackinaw Island, and how do you preserve it, and who decides. But the city council, I think, is in a really dicey position. Most of them are business owners.
I was going to ask you about that, and I'm sure a lot of it depends on who gets to make the decisions and what pressure there is, and what their background is too.
Right, and Dan Musser Jr., the owner, the current president, of the Musser family running the Grand Hotel, they own a number of businesses or properties in the city, and he's on the city council, and so he's weighing what, and my understanding is his position has gone back and forth, but I did not get an interview with him, so I can't say exactly what he is saying. But you can imagine for him, he's got all his fellow business owners talking in one ear, but then if he votes against historic districts, and the news all around Michigan is owner of the Grand Hotel votes against creating historic districts on Mackinac Island, that's kind of dicey too. So
yeah, that's a tough spot to be in. All right, well, I know we're going to keep following up on that.
There's one more point that makes this interesting. Then the other problem they have, this is just too much for me. Now they're running out of sewer space, and because they don't have any more land, and they just yesterday, I'm told, and I was not there, they either proposed or passed a 6-month moratorium on new construction because there's no place to flush the poo, or they're running out of capacity for that. So that's this other wild card sort of spinning into this.
Maybe that will be the thing that saves historic preservation concerns on Mackinac Island. Wouldn't it be?
Wouldn't that be ironic?
What came down to
end the debate.
Right there. Well, it's nice to take a break from the discussion on the ferry service on Mackinac, give them something else to talk about for a while. We'll come back to that at another time, I'm sure. Believe it or not, we're already out of time here on the briefing room. I want to thank you for joining us, and thanks Sara Simnitch from 9 and 10 News. Peter Payette from Interlochen Public Radio. Peter, thank you, and thank you for watching. We'll be off for the Christmas holiday next week, but we'll see you in a couple weeks here on the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich. Have a great day.